She won most talkative in high school, and she has been running her mouth ever since. Welcome to the Lisa Fisher Said podcast with your host, Lisa Fisher.
When did you start having steak every day? When did you make the switch?
I actually started 22 years ago. Well, I've always been a big steak person. I've always loved meat all the time. I was that kid that you had to fight and force to get vegetables down my throat.
Right.
And so all I wanted to do was eat the meat. That was everything that I wanted anyway. So that was always my preference anyway. And so when I moved out and went to college, I mostly just ate meat anyway, and I sort of would get some greens or something just out of, I was like, oh, I guess I'm supposed to get that. But when I was doing my undergraduate degree at the University of Washington in Seattle, I was taking cancer biology, and I'd already taken biology and botany, and I already knew that plants use defense chemicals to defend themselves, and that plants and animals were an evolutionary arms race in order to, stay ahead of the other animal, the other sort of predators. So plants would become more and more poisonous, so less and less things could eat them, and then animals become adapted to those poisons, and so on. We were, again, going over this in cancer biology, but from a cancer perspective. So we were looking at carcinogens, and we looked specifically at the carcinogens available in vegetables. And we learned that there had already been discovered 136 just in Brussels sprouts. And this was 22 years ago, right? So 136 just in Brussels sprouts, over 100 in mushrooms, spinach, kale, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, broccoli, every plant that you've ever eaten. We were given a list, and they had 60, 80, or over 100 known human carcinogens in them each, and they were very abundant. We've known since the 1980s from work of Professor Bruce Ames from UC Berkeley that the naturally occurring pesticides in plants that they use to stop insects, animals, and pathogens from preying on them outweigh the pesticides that we spray on them industrially by weight by a factor of 10,000, and that the naturally occurring poisons are, orders of magnitude times more likely to cause cancer than the pesticides we spray on them industrially. So specifically in mushrooms, like white mushrooms that we just eat on a normal daily basis, and alar, which was the pesticide that he was looking at specifically in that study, was 500 times more likely to cause cancer than alar. So mushrooms 500 times more likely to cause cancer. So we were quite blown away by this, and obviously taken aback. And everyone just thought he must be joking, but we realized he wasn't. And I remember thinking to myself, like, well, because your entire life you're being inundated with eat your vegetables, they're good for you. They're the only thing that's good for you, even though they taste like garbage, which should tell you something. Deer don't go around eating the horrible tasting leaves. They eat the leaves that taste good, and that's a natural positive feedback that your body's giving you, saying, hey, this is something good for you, or this is something bad for you. Don't eat it. And there are outliers, obviously, like sugar and things like that, but you shouldn't hate the taste of something that's good for you. That you can take to the bank. And so I remember thinking in my head, I was like, but vegetables are still good for you though anyway, right? And he must have just read our minds, because he looked at us, gave us a funny look, and just said, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables.
Oh my gosh!
Plants are trying to kill you. And I said, right. That's it. I'll just stop eating plants. It really hit home with me. And so when I went to the grocery store after that, I just started looking around, and everything had plants in it, or was plants entirely. And so I was just walking around the grocery store thinking, like, well, what do I eat? And I came across some eggs, and I said, okay, eggs. I guess I'll eat some eggs. That doesn't come from a plant. Meat doesn't come from a plant. So I just ate eggs and meat, and an occasional dairy, but mostly just eggs and meat. And that was it. That was my whole rationale, was I don't want to eat plants because they have these defense chemicals and carcinogens that are actually worse than pesticides. And so it's not that, if you grow it in your own garden and you don't spray it with things, it'll be okay. It'll be better, but it's still a drop in the bucket compared to the actual plant itself. And so, that's how I came to it. And I just felt amazing after that. And I was playing high level rugby. I was an All-American. I was playing in college, and I was playing in the most senior leagues in America and Canada, and then at the professional level in England as well. And I just felt amazing. I just felt absolutely unstoppable physically and mentally. I was doing, I could get on top of all of my schoolwork and all. I was in my undergrad in pre-med while playing rugby at a high level and training, 6 to 8 hours a day, every single day, and playing games every weekend and traveling. So it was absolutely game changing for me.
So the heretic, the professor, was he run out of town on a rail? Because
No.
now
Yeah.
it's a political movement. Then 20-something years ago, they just thought, he's just a little out there. So whatever happened to him?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I actually don't know because I've actually tried to find out what happened to him, especially at the University of Washington. They're very green, let's say that,
Yes,
So
very, yeah.
I would imagine that that might have ruffled some feathers. Maybe not so much that, because University of Washington, while there might be a political bent in certain things, they are very academically and scientifically minded. There's a lot of great work that comes out of there. It's one of the top medical schools in the country. That's when I was taking genetics there, that was where the Human Genome Project was being headed from. So that was actually spearheaded at the University of Washington. So it's a very, very scientifically minded and scientifically based university. So as long as you can back it up, I think you can go with it. And this is just a hard fact. Botany is a hard science, and this is something that any botanist on Earth can tell you, that plants use defense chemicals in order to protect themselves from predation. That is just a fact, and you can see that in any textbook on botany or horticulture.
So are medical students being taught botany then with that same? But that's what I thought. Then what's gone wrong? I understand follow the money, and there's obviously money involved in one movement and not in the sweet cows we eat. But where did this all go wrong?
Yeah, well, I think you're right. I think there's a lot of industry money in this. There's a lot of influence from certainly the sugar industries and the food industries in general, because they literally make trillions of dollars off of this plant-based processed garbage. The sugar industry alone makes $1.4 trillion a year. And then it was calculated, it was referenced in a book by Professor Robert Lustig from UCSF, who sort of broke the case open on fructose and sugar and how harmful that is, that we spend $2.4 trillion a year just on medical expenses treating the effects of that sugar consumption. So it's a losing equation. So there's a lot of money going into it. And so, we can actually trace this back to the 60s and beyond, when there was this industry opposition research going out trying to protect their interests in sugar. There was research coming out. There were heart disease is actually a very new disease. It was not prevalent before the 20th century. It was really not even known about until the 20th century. And then President Eisenhower had a heart attack, and then you'll see headlines, and there are actual headlines that says, "What is this new heart disease? Baffled, doctors baffled over this heart disease." They didn't know what it was, and so they were like, "Okay, now we have this presidential commission just looking at. We need to find out what this is, and this is now a matter of homeland security and things like that." And so they were looking around, and people found that there was a direct correlation with the increase in sugar consumption and processed sugar, refined sugar in developed nations, and the rise in heart disease. And so the sugar companies saw this and went, right, well, we need to get opposition research out there. And that's something that they do. Coca-Cola and other companies will do this. They'll research will come out saying, hey, this product isn't great and maybe even causes harm. And then they'll pay, 30 people to put out, 30 papers to come out and say, oh, actually, it's not that bad. And they say, oh, well, look, it's just a mixed message. We just need more data. We need more data because there's so much data. Yeah, well, everything's saying that it's okay, or maybe it's a mixed picture, you've paid for. So, actually, no, it's not all that cloudy. So that's what happened. And so we actually have internal memos, the University of California in San Francisco, where Professor Lustig hails from. They published actual internal memos from the sugar companies back in the 60s in the Journal of the American Medical Association. It was one of the top medical journals in the world. So JAMA, J-A-M-A. And they published these papers showing that the sugar companies saw that, like, hey, there's research showing that sugar causes heart disease. We need to cover this up. And so in their own words, they detailed how they paid off 3 Harvard professors to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol is causing heart disease, and then to exonerate sugar and say it was safe and call it just an empty calorie. It's just an empty calorie, which sounds self-deprecating, but it's actually hiding the fact that it's actually very, very, very harmful. And then one of those professors was named head of the USDA, and it was he who authored and published the 1977 USDA declaration saying that cholesterol causes heart disease, saturated fat increases cholesterol, stop eating both, and it changed the entire direction of the health of humanity. After that, people actually listened. They really listened. It just shut down the debate. I mean, this was a hotly debated topic for decades before that. There was a Dr. Yudkin from the UK who wrote a book called, it was all about sugar. It was something like Sweet, White, Deadly or something like that. It was all about sugar and how toxic it was, and he was right. But he was completely discredited after this. Now that teacher said so, that was it. USDA said it, well, it must be true. And, this is appealing to authority. I mean, this is, Hitler said a lot of things too. Are we listening to everything that he said? He was an authority. He was in charge of a country. And of course we don't listen to the silly things he said. But people listen to authority quite often. It's a bit of a flaw in humanity, in the human condition, that because the official body said so, it must be true. And of course, that's not the case. There are many, many times that even very good, willing, people, earnest, recommendations just turned out to be wrong. So, and obviously they don't all have to be fraudulent, but it doesn't have to be right. And so you just have to sort of take these things with a grain of salt. But people didn't. They said, okay, that's it. We'll do this. And it just took off like wildfire. And in America, we reduced the saturated fat and cholesterol intake by 30%, reduced red meat by 33%, really replace it with chicken, but like lean meats and things like that, but drop the red meat. Increased fruits and vegetables by 30 and 40% respectively, and grains and sugar. So what were the results? Well, first of all, the heart disease rate tripled, right? And obesity tripled, stroke rate tripled, cancer rates also tripled, which is something that people aren't aware of. And then things like type 2 diabetes, autoimmune disorders, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, even neurodevelopmental delays such as autism, all increased exponentially. And even psychiatric disorders, schizophrenia, bipolar, major depression, OCD, all of these things increased. And they all increased at the exact same time. In fact, there's a Harvard psychiatrist who just published a book called Brain Energy, Dr. Chris Palmer.
Yes.
And he made the exact same case that I'm making, is that these psychiatric conditions, as with these other conditions, they're all metabolic issues from eating the wrong thing. We're eating something that we're not biologically adapted to and programmed and designed to eat safely. And so it's throwing off our body, it's throwing off our metabolism, and specifically our mitochondria in that case, and in a lot of other cases. And this is causing harm. And it's manifesting in various disease forms.
Well, you mentioned the way we're wired, I think, as humans, to follow an authority figure. So, I mean, I would agree with you, but I think the last 2 years, or now almost 3, have shown us that people start going, whoa, wait. Now, we do have the internet that we didn't have in 1977. So do you think then now, because people start saying, maybe we've been lied to, maybe the food pyramid isn't the best thing to have 9 to 12, 15 grain, whatever it is, of whole grains a day? I mean, the fatter we've gotten, the more we've counted calories. Do you think now we're rising up, Dr. Chaffee, and people are thinking, you know what, let me do my own research, let me see what works for my body, and everybody else hush?
Yeah, I think so, and I think a lot of people that are coming to this sort of way of eating, where they're realizing that this was actually a lie, and they were being severely misled, and they're seeing for themselves with their own lying eyes that their diseases are regressing, and in some cases reversing. So like type 2 diabetes and even heart disease, people's CAC scores can actually come down if you start eating in different ways. Dr. Aseem Malhotra, who's one of the top cardiologists in the UK, wrote a book called a statin-free life. And he shows that just by reducing the inflammatory factors in the foods that you're eating, by going on like a ketogenic diet, just like Dr. Palmer recommends, and what do you replace that with? Well, you have to replace it with animal fats, really. And so you're going on to a meat-based, high-fat diet, which is steering you towards what I think is our biologically appropriate diet, what our evolved or designed diet is, which is meat, which is just meat, eating a carnivore diet. So you're getting closer and closer to that. You're getting into a metabolic state that is appropriate to us and our species, and really all other animals in the wild, that even carnivores and herbivores, they're all in this ketogenic starvation state. It's not a starvation state. It's not a fasting state. That's our primary metabolic state. That's the primary metabolic state of nearly all animals in the wild. And so, people are seeing that. And so they're saying, and all their family and their doctors are saying, you're going to kill yourself if you do this diet. You're going to give yourself a heart attack. And in fact, they're finding the opposite. They're losing weight. They're reversing their diseases. They're coming off their blood pressure medication. Their insulin is reducing, and all their other medications are reducing as well. You're having autoimmune, people with autoimmune issues, literally within months, coming off all their medications and doing remarkably better. Some take longer than others, but there are a lot of people that can completely suppress their autoimmune issues, even epilepsy. And that's something we've known for a century, that you can use a ketogenic diet in order to suppress or even prevent seizures. And what does that mean? That might actually mean that some people with certain brain chemistry may actually have carbohydrates and sugar and certain things may actually precipitate seizures in them. It's not that they're having these seizures and this is suppressing it somehow. No. It could be that the carbohydrates and the sugar is actually changing their brain energy, changing the dynamics and the metabolic function of the mitochondria in their brain, and this is precipitating seizures. And so going back off of that, going towards our natural diet in a ketogenic diet or even a carnivore diet, now they're not seeing these seizures. It does help a lot of people. This has been in the medical literature for literally a century. And before that, fasting was the only thing that seemed to help people with epilepsy. And for the same reason, you're getting into the metabolic state you're supposed to be in. And you're not getting this haywire metabolic issue in your brain. And so this is something that people are seeing in real terms in their real life. This is an objective measure. Someone's having 3 seizures a day, now they're having none. You can tell what's going on there. Someone who has Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, and they're having 20 to 30 bloody stools every day, and they're in horrible pain, and now that's gone. Rheumatoid arthritis as well. You can see x-rays of the damage that it's doing to their joints. Now it's gone. So these are things that people can absolutely see with objective authority, and they can look at that and go, wow, okay, I was lied to. What else was I lied to about? And the wool comes off their eyes, and they really start digging into, what else could possibly be going on.
I hope that's the case. I do hope the last 3 years have taught us something, and that is to question. To always question. I'm a journalist, so it's just my inquisitive nature to always raise my hand and go, no, wait a minute. Not to be difficult, but just to say there's got to be another side. So. But a lot of people aren't that way. A lot of people, lock, stock, and barrel, the doctor said, my cholesterol's 205, I'm on a statin, because I'm a health coach. I'm going, seriously? Like, my question is, you believe him? You haven't taken your fingers to your device, and they're like, no, my doctor said I need a statin. My cholesterol's 205. It makes me pull my hair out. Okay, let's talk more then about diet-specific things, because one of our instructors at the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, New York, was Terry Walls, who obviously has an incredible story about reversing her multiple sclerosis. She was wheelchair-bound. She was lethargic. It's really amazing. So in the Walls protocol, she does look at more of a ketogenic diet, but 8 to 10 leafy greens a day. My thyroid suffering friends think, ooh, I'm going to get a goiter. But the rest of the world says, okay, I'm going to eat all the kale I can eat. So what's your scientific belief in that? What's your personal belief in reversing a condition? Do you have to have 8 to 10 cups of leafy greens a day to do it?
No, I don't think you need 8 to 10 leafy greens a day at all. I don't think you need any leafy greens at all. I don't think you need any plant matter at all. All the best data and research and evidence that we have shows that humans have been living, and our ancestors, were living as pure carnivores, really just eating meat, just drinking water, maybe dairy, fermented dairy generally, for literally 2 million years. There was a large paper that came out from University of Tel Aviv from Dr. Mickey Ben-Dor, just showing all the different data collected. And that was what he showed, that like, we have been, hyper carnivores, eating nearly exclusive meat. Maybe we would have some plants here and there if we were starving and we needed to, or use them medicinally, but generally not. We were just eating meat. And we can think about this in terms of the ice ages, when people are crossing the land bridge from Asia to North America. What fruits were they picking? Right? There's nothing there. There's nothing there. What sort of salads and things like that were they getting? No, there wasn't anything. It was only meat, and they were living as the Inuits are now, or the Nanette now. And they are living on meat. There's no plants to eat per se. So you're not going to do well on pine needles, which is basically the only thing that survives up there, if they were even there. And people will argue, they'll say, well, when the ice sheets were coming down, people actually moved towards the equator. There's actually no evidence for that. That is just an assertion that is not backed by any data. In fact, the fossil record shows the opposite. It shows that as the ice sheets were coming down, our ancestors were going up, and they were going into the ice, because that's where the megafauna was. That's where the mammoths were. And so it's exactly the opposite. And so how are we doing that if we were just herbivores? It doesn't make any sense. It's also funny because I've never in my entire life heard the assertion that humans are herbivores until maybe the last couple of years. Even the vegan and vegetarian push has always been about sort of animal rights. It doesn't feel nice to eat animals, and I agree with that. It doesn't feel nice, but it is reality, and reality is going to win. You can deny it for so long, but reality will win. And now they're saying, oh, no, but actually we should. This is more healthy. This is how we've evolved. They're like, no, that's actually not the case. And so, that sort of dismisses that there. Like, there were no plants to eat there. And if you look at all the different sort of plants that you need, first of all, you cannot get basic nutrition from the plant or fungi kingdom in combination. You'll never get, there's no B12, D3, or K2. You'll never get enough vitamin A. You have to eat 6 pounds of carrots to get enough vitamin A every day. All the essential, you can get a complete protein. That's a straw man. They'll say like, oh, people say you're not going to get enough protein. You can get protein. It's not very good. It's not bioavailable, but you can get a complete protein. You can get all the different essential amino acids, but there's so many other things that you're not going to get, like the essential fatty acids. And 70% of the solid matter of our brain is fat and cholesterol. 20% of that fat is DHA. That does not exist in plants or fungus. And so and we don't really make it ourselves. You have to get that from the food that you're eating. So there are so many things that you have to have that you cannot get from plants. There's nothing that you have to have that you cannot get from meat. And so the idea that we have only eaten plants, that's just wrong. I mean, it's just, you just aren't paying attention. So we can't have been herbivores. And there are plenty of studies, such as the stable isotope study. So this is not just one study or a few studies. This is a technique that we use. It's stable nitrogen 15 that we take out of fossils or even mummies. They've done this in Egypt and looked at, okay, what are these guys eating? Because there's a certain amount of stable nitrogen 15 in plants. You can measure that, and animals that eat that, they'll concentrate that and say, okay, this animal was an herbivore. They were eating a lot of these sorts of plants. And then this animal was eating animals that were eating plants. And then you can actually delineate the food chain, right? So you can actually see if an animal was eating an animal that was eating an animal that was eating an animal that was eating plants. And that was us. We were actually at the top of the food chain. That's something that I learned as a kid, that humans were apex predators, top of the food chain. Apex predators do not graze. Apex predators do not have side salads. Apex predators eat meat. They eat any animal around them, that they care to. And that's the whole idea. And so our carnivore rating was actually higher than lions, hyenas, foxes, wolves alive at the same time in the same area, because we were eating the lions, hyenas, foxes, and wolves, as well as all the things that they ate as well. So that is just who we are and where we came from. And the further away you get from your natural food source, the more health issues you're going to get. This is why there's signs at the park and at the zoo that say, don't feed the animals. This is not their natural food. They will get sick. What do they get sick with? They get obesity, heart disease, liver disease, diabetes, cancer. Dogs and cats, same thing. Known carnivores, and yet we give them grain and plant-based kibble. They get the same things. We get the same things. And vets are now saying that there's this massive uptick in human diseases in pets, and they're scratching their heads about it. And yet they know full well that if you feed something what it doesn't eat in the wild, what it's not supposed to eat biologically, it's going to get sick. So this is not something that was new. There are even plenty of different maladies that like farm vets would know, like big animal vets would know, that when a horse or a cow would get into different sorts of feed that they're not supposed to, they will get these illnesses. And that is a direct cause from eating the wrong thing. We need to recognize diabetes, heart disease, even cancer, autoimmune disorders. We need to start psychiatric disorders. We need to start recognizing these as food toxicities from eating the wrong things as well, because you treat them very differently. Instead of finding a pill and trying to fix a bacteria and an infection, you're just removing an offending agent. You're removing, this is an environmental exposure, poisoning sort of thing. Then you just get rid of that exposure from you, and then things will start to get better.
And what about my functional medicine doctor here always says, you are what you eat eats. It's not, which I think is a great way to look beyond yourself. It's where your animal is sourced. But the cows eat grass. So then how does that reflect? How is that okay for me? Not that I'm not saying it's, illegal, but how does that benefit me if he's eating grass? Because I'm not eating grass. I don't want another salad as long as I live. I said it.
Yeah. I don't either. And I don't think I've ever enjoyed any salads that did not have just copious amounts of meat and dressing.
Right. And crunched and chewed and crunched with chicken on it and all the things. And I have such higher satiety eating the way I eat now. But then how do we justify? We want our animals, though, to eat, or ruminant animals to eat grass, right?
Well, whatever they're designed to eat, right? So, and there are different kind of grasses. And so actually they're designed to eat specific grasses, and even some grasses will actually be quite harmful for them. And, this isn't exclusive to us. Like we don't have the defenses to these defense chemicals that would be required to eat these things safely. I mean, define safely is relative. It's all relative. If you're dying and you need to eat something, you're going to get nutrition. Like it's safe enough, right? And that's sort of where sugar is an outlier, because we've recognized fructose is a bit sweeter, because it's not anything that fructose is in is not like, it's not going to kill you that day. That's what we found. And so we think we've recognized that as something safe, will give you a quick hit of energy short term to go on. But cows have the machinery to break down and extract nutrients from the grass that they're designed to eat. And they have the machinery to break down and detoxify those toxins safely and get rid of them. And so the leftover is that they're able to magically turn plant material into animal tissue, which is amazing. And they're able to break down fiber and extract the nutrients from that. We are not able to do that. There's no vertebrate animal that can break down fiber. It's the bacteria in their rumen that they've cultivated that actually eats the fiber. And and as a byproduct, they actually excrete short chain fatty acids. So even cows or gorillas or other herbivores, they're actually absorbing fat and protein, because the fat that the bacteria is excreting, and then the bacteria die off, and they absorb that as protein. So even gorillas that just eat green leaves, they get 70% of their calories from saturated fat. Cows get around 80%. from saturated fat. So it's really fat that runs the animal kingdom. So they're turning this grass into fat and protein, and that's what we get because we don't have that ability. There are a lot of nutrients in plants. That's true. Not all of them are available to us because we don't have the biochemical machinery to extract them. Good example of this is corn. Corn, when we picked it up from Mesoamerica, people were eating it. It's generally the poor that were eating it, but they had a process called nixtamalization. This is where the word tamale comes from this process. And this, they soak it in lye and do all these other sorts of things. And this actually detoxifies it a bit and also makes these nutrients more bioavailable. So Europeans sort of saw that and just went, yeah, looks great, and forgot the technique that they were doing or just didn't care. And they brought this over. It's very cheap, very easy to grow. And so this really took off in Europe and then the rest of America. The problem is it's quite nutrient poor. And so this was a staple in poor households, and they were getting quite sick, and they were getting what's called pellagra, which is a thiamine deficiency, and they were dying of this. So actually, there was a lot of people were dying of this. They thought this was an infection. They figured out later that it was not an infection. This was a vitamin deficiency, and the irony there is that corn actually has a ton of thiamine in it. It's just not accessible because the chemical bond of what it's bound to, we don't have the machinery to break. Because we are not designed to eat this plant.
So this was before it was genetically modified. So even before Monsanto or the 1950s and 60s.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Hundreds of years ago. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's the thing is that we don't have the machinery to break this down because we're not designed to eat corn. That's how a lot of plants protect themselves and their nutrients. They bind up a lot of the nutrients in ways that animals really can't access. Okay. And that's why we have to use these chemical and heat processes to try to break these things down artificially. But if you have to do that, if you have to use chemicals, if you have to use a process to extract nutrients and to detoxify things, like that's why we cook beans. 5 kidney beans on the WHO website will put you in the hospital. Right. And actually undercooked beans can be more toxic than uncooked beans. So like al dente sort of beans, don't do it. It's not a good idea. And so, that's if you have to put something through a process, well, then by definition, we didn't evolve to eat that. We weren't designed to eat that. We had to do something to it in order to make it more palatable and more safe. And so that's a common theme in plants. There are a lot of these things that we don't have access to. We can't break down properly. We can't access the nutrients to. Or there's other things like phytic acid, which will bind to nutrients and make it inaccessible. It'll form a bond that we can't break. Oxalates will also bind to these things. Protease inhibitors, they'll stop our body from actually even breaking down normally bioavailable meat or protein like in meat and make it unavailable. So whenever you look on a packet, you say, oh, it has this much protein, this much thiamine, this much iron, this much of this other thing, that may not actually be what your body is able to absorb and use. You might actually be taking away from your body because you can be taking these anti-nutrients that actually will sap your body of various nutrients as well, and you can really harm yourself. Just like the people with pellagra, they were dying. There were people, I don't even know what the numbers were, but certainly in the thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or more, were dying from this. It's a major thing.
Okay, fun fact. You were talking about the kidney beans. My son was a student at LSU, engineering student. He's the one that told me about intermittent fasting, so super smart and all that. But he likes to tell the story that kidney beans have to be cooked a long time because, they have red beans and rice in Cajun food. And he did not cook the kidney beans long enough. And he said it was the sickest he's ever been. I'm sorry, I'm laughing, but, it was just a new kid learning to cook. And that's when you realize that there's something to it. That you got people listening, you got to cook the kidney beans. Well, let me ask you this. Then as a college student, you never had chip and dip? You never had cheese dip, salsa, and corn chips and all that? Are you saying you totally turned your back on that and you were eating bacon and beef and butter and eggs?
So I have now, definitely now. Yeah, I don't touch that stuff. But
You don't miss it. You don't miss a crunch.
nah, no, no.
I
I
do
don't.
miss a crunch.
Yeah. Well, there's things you can do. Actually, you can take a pork loin, right?
Yeah.
Just like a
Yeah.
tenderloin, sort of semi-freeze it or freeze it, and you just get like one of those sharp, like, meat cutting knives. And you just
Right.
slice it off. You do it quite thin, and put it on drying racks. Put it on a meat dehydrator,
Yep.
or food dehydrator. It comes out like, if you do it really thin, it's like Lay's potato chips. You can do it sort of thicker as well.
Wow.
But I mean, literally, like Lay's potato chips. It's like exactly that crunch, but it's meat flavored because it is meat, and you put a bit of salt on it or whatever, and it's fantastic. And
So those are the kind of carnivore crisps that people buy? Have you seen those
yes,
packaged
kind of,
foods?
yeah.
I haven't had it.
Yeah, those are you could do the same sort of thing. You could
Okay.
buy them, but they're easy enough to make.
All right.
And the best one to do, I've found, is the pork loin. Just because
right.
it's sort of, it's cylindrical, and you can
Yes.
sort of cut off little,
And
circle
you're talking
shaped
about
sort
the
of
loin
chips.
with the fat, not the tenderloin that's lower in fat.
No, yes, the tenderloin.
The
Yes.
tenderloin, the smaller.
Tenderloin, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so the
Cylinder. All right.
long
Got it, yeah.
cylindrical piece, yeah. And you can just cut that off into, little dimes, and and it's and it is great. And you're cutting it against the grain, right? So
Right.
it's just crunchy and chewy. Sometimes if you're drying, with long fibers, it's just harder to chew and kind of get, like beef jerky
Yeah.
is can be like tough and try to
Yeah.
get through it. Whereas if you do this against the grain, it just chews up very easily, and it has that same sort of crunchy, soft texture. But the thing is I just really prefer feeling the way I do all the time to eating whatever. Like I don't miss it. I've always loved meat. That's always been my favorite anyway. But I would rather feel like a superhero 24/7 than eat something nummy every now and then. That's just
Okay,
that's
that's
just
a
my
good way to put it.
preference.
Because you have to pay for when you have. I had corn after not having corn. Going carnivore in July. We're recording this in December, and family was in town. We went to the Mexican restaurant. It is nothing but corn. As you talked about tamales, and having the corn chips and having a taco. And there was a headache that came on that I hadn't had. I mean, I hadn't felt that way in months, and so not going to do corn again.
Well, that's it, and so I've tested that as well, and because I did this 22 years ago, I actually did that for sort of 5-6 years, and then I sort of slipped off of it when I was living in England because I just didn't have the same access to meat over there. Some of it was breaded, and I was thinking to myself, you can make excuses for any bad decision,
Yes,
and so it's
that's
like,
true.
well, is it that bad? Is it
Yeah.
poison? Dose makes the poison, so maybe it's not
Right.
all that bad. And I convinced myself of that, and so I started with eating this breaded, crumbed meat, and a few months into it, I remember thinking to myself, like, why don't I feel as just superhuman amazing as I normally do? Am I not working out as hard? Am I getting older? I was 25 at the time. I figured, okay, am I just dying now? I'm just over the hill, and like, that's it. And looking back, that was when I sort of started slipping off, and because I came back to this, and again, I was always just very meat heavy. But after that, the main thing that did was it stopped me from being in that mindset of I'm not eating any plants. Then it was just kind of like, oh, well, a little bit here and there. And then it's just, you're back to sort of eating normally again, and still very meat centric. And I was still very sort of cautious about things, but it got a foot in the door. And so, my attitude towards it changed dramatically since then. And then sort of 5-6 years ago, I came across information that, humans actually are carnivores as a species. Biologically, this is just the kind of animal we are. And I looked back and I was like, that's it. That's what I was doing. That's why I felt so amazing. And I was like, right, I knew it. I knew plants were trying to kill me. I get rid of these stupid things. And I just started, just going full on just meat and water after that. And I felt absolutely amazing. I completely changed my health. I had unlimited energy. My body just changed dramatically. I lost 23 pounds in 10 days. And I wasn't even eating carbs. Yeah. I wasn't even eating carbohydrates. I was basically doing keto. I wasn't doing keto to do
Yeah.
keto, but I was
Yeah.
only eating greens and eating a limited amount of meat, and it was quite lean meat. But I had come across research showing that cholesterol is actually really good for you. It was never a cause of disease. I knew about the fructose research, and I knew about the plants and all these sorts of things, and so I was able to really come at it from a different way that time. And so I just stopped eating all the greens, and I started eating way more fatty meat, and probably quintupled my caloric intake. And I lost 23 pounds
Isn't
in
that
10
crazy?
days. I was working out very hard as well, lifting a lot of weights, but at the same time, that's a lot.
Yeah,
and
that's
and
impressive. Now,
yeah, and I felt absolutely amazing. And I was like, right, I'm ready to go back playing rugby again. I was 38. I'd just come back from doing humanitarian work in Bangladesh. I was, volunteering as a doctor in the refugee camps in southern Bangladesh to help the Rohingya refugees that were
well, of
escaping
course you
genocide
did.
in Burma.
I mean, what haven't you done? Of course.
Well, yeah. Well, so I was doing that, and then I was back, and I was just like, hey, I want to get back in shape. I want to go play rugby, but I was like, I was out of shape. I was like, I don't know, 270 pounds or something like that, like out of shape, and I hadn't been doing anything in like a year or more, and literally in 10 days I was down to 243.
How tall are
And
you?
6'3".
So, rugby players then are that big, that sizable, like,
Generally, yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
That,
There's different sizes for different
okay.
positions, but yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's impressive. I
Yeah.
mean,
And so
for a
you can
guy that size,
be
but
big.
all muscle.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, I mean, I was not all muscle at that time, but but then I just changed, just basically changed over from extra fat to muscle, but I
Yeah.
stayed at 243 pounds. And I stayed on the dot. I was 243 pounds every single morning for months after that. It was literally never 242 or 244. It was 243 on the dot every single day. And I was lifting weights for 3 to 4 hours a day. I was playing rugby, and my body was just transforming in front of me. And I was just eating a ton of meat and lifting a lot of weights and working out. And I just transformed. And so I was stacking on muscle and shredding body fat. And I turned into 243 pounds, solid 6% body fat, just solid muscle, and it just felt absolutely incredible.
Do you supplement at all?
No, you don't need to. You get everything that you need from meat. And so, if you need to take supplements just to get basic nutrition, then by definition, your diet is deficient. So carnivore isn't. So just for basic nutrition, you don't need that. If you're talking about, from supplementing from a workout perspective, certainly you don't need to take any protein shakes or anything like that. You get hundreds of grams of protein a day if you're just eating meat, especially if you're working out a lot. It's going to trigger your body to want more. Your appetite is just naturally going to increase. And I used to take like pre-workout drinks and like branched chain amino acids before I work out, and like that was actually a huge game changer when I was just eating a normal diet like that. Especially the branched chain amino acids, that made a huge difference in how I felt. If I was playing like a rugby tournament, like a sevens tournament, I could go all day and I'd be pretty sort of worn out, and bodies are tired at the end of the day or end of 2 days or 3 days. If I would take that branched chain amino acids drink, I'd be just refreshed. It'd be like it was my first game out there, and I just felt great. I tried that on carnivore. It actually took me down a peg. I didn't feel as good. I didn't get as good of a workout. I think probably had a lot to do with the artificial sweeteners and things like that in there that sort of screwed with you. I don't think it was like the BCAAs themselves. And so I tried dabbling with that and getting the unflavored BCAAs, which just are the worst tasting things you'll ever come across in your entire life. I won't like appall you and your guests by describing it, but it is bad. It is not palatable. That's not something you're going to be able to do on a daily basis. And so I just like, right, I just don't do this. So yeah, no, I don't take anything like that. I don't take any lifting supplements. I don't think there's anything you need. Most of these things are plant-based anyway, like you have to have this thing that can boost your testosterone or do this or that or whatever. I have patients in clinic because I have a functional medicine practice outside of my residency in neurosurgery, and we put people on a carnivore diet, people in their 60s and 70s, men in their 60s and 70s, and they increase their testosterone by 30 to 40% in the first 3 months
Wow.
without any hormone supplementation. So like this is something that's just, makes a massive, massive, massive difference. So I don't feel that I need any of those things. I feel better than I've ever felt in my entire life, even as compared to myself as a professional athlete when not eating this way. When I was a professional athlete eating this way, I've never felt better in my entire life. I don't think I've ever been, I've never been that fit in my life. I don't think there was anyone on earth who was in as good a shape as I was. I really feel that way. Maybe just my own hubris, but I was in insane shape. Like I literally could not get tired. I was at a dead sprint for 8 hours a day, every single day, and I could not get tired. So, I never reached the maximum potential that my body could give me when I was eating like that anyway. So I've never seen the need to try supplements.
Well, I think, because our soil is so deficient, I do love the magnesium I take, the magnesium breakthrough that I take from Bioptimizers. That's just, and I am a thyroid patient. I mean, I've reversed my Hashimoto's, but because my gland was attacked for so long, that little thing just shriveled up, and I still have to take that. The only medicine I have to take is NP thyroid. So I was just thinking of things like magnesium, but I get it.
Well, no, but you're right though, because the thing is that you can absolutely have deficient soil in certain areas, and you can have, for whatever reason, like you say, it matters the food that your food eats, right? Because if your food is going to be on a feed lot and they're sort of like nutrient deficient in a certain way, they're going to be a bit nutrient deficient. So you're going to be nutrient deficient. I have found that most people are magnesium deficient in Australia anyway. There's so many people, and they really do need these supplementations. It can take months and months and months and months and months of even eating right and even supplementing to get that magnesium back to a normal level. So if you're in that, most people are going to be in that area. So it is probably going to be beneficial for most people to supplement at least early on. Maybe you get to a point where you don't need to, but it really doesn't matter if you check your labs and your magnesium is deficient, or your zinc, or your whatever. If it's deficient, even if you're on a carnivore diet and you should be getting everything that you need, for whatever reason you're not, supplementation is actually a good idea. So I'm not against supplementation. For me, I've done my bloods. I don't think I need that, but that is something that you're absolutely right. If this is something, if you do find that you're a bit deficient, and especially if you're coming from a deficient state, by the time I checked my bloods, I was already 3 years into this, and so my endocrinologist friend who sort of did all my bloods was just like, I've never seen bloods like this. He was really blown away, and that's why he got interested in a carnivore diet as well, and now he promotes that and pitches that to his patients, simply from our discussions, but also from seeing the proof of my blood work. But if you are deficient for whatever reason, especially early on, most people are going to be deficient early on. Supplementation is actually, not a bad idea.
Okay. Talking about labs, I noticed mine changed, and not in a great way, but I was measuring two things that I really chase are my fasting insulin, because I'm a 6-year intermittent faster. My fasting insulin is about 2.2. And then my C-reactive protein was 0.17 when I started carnivore, because I am a thyroid patient and bioidentical hormone replacement patient. My nurse practitioner does kind of keep a short leash on what my labs are doing, and I kind of look, but I noticed my fasting insulin came up to 5.5. I know that's not an emergency, but my C-reactive protein came up to like 0.5. I mean, it's not much. Do you think that was an aberrant day? Because I know our labs can fluctuate, or do I need to live? Is it okay to live with a little higher fasting insulin and C-reactive protein, though I don't want those high?
Well, it can be. You will see variations in your lab tests just based on the conditions that you get those under. So we recommend to our patients in our clinic that you always get your bloods under the same conditions. So on the same time of day, the same hydration status, same fasting status. Okay. So even if something's not required as a fasting lab, we would say get it between, 9 and 11 in the morning and fasted with at least 2 glasses of water, no more than 4 glasses of water.
Okay.
And say just keep it in that consistent range and you'll have more consistent results. And so you can check that. Also with CRP is a marker of generalized inflammation. So this is something that we use in the hospital to see if someone has an infection or has some sort of something horrible going on. If they get surgery, their CRP is going to go up. If they have an infection, their CRP is going to go up. So that's something that can go up for a lot of different things as well. Insulin, your fasting insulin is really not going to be affected by meat or fat at all. I mean, there's plenty of biochemical studies showing that fat does not affect your insulin levels. And so when you're eating that way, it's not really going to affect it. So I really wouldn't be too worried. If there was something else sort of slipping in, there's certain lectins that can bind onto insulin binding sites. There are obviously, if you're going to the place and getting some chips and nachos every now and then, that's going to affect something. Yeah. But I think in general, if you're really just sticking to certainly a ketogenic diet and in particular a carnivore diet, that you really just don't have to worry about it. I don't check my labs in that regard. I trust my body. I don't have diabetes or anything like that, but I just trust that whatever, I trust that I'm eating physiologically. I'm eating to my biological design, and whatever my body wants to do with that, it's free to do.
Okay, let's talk about fiber. That's one pushback I get all the time. Lisa, I have to have these plants for fiber. What's the answer?
No, you don't. It's actually
that's it. Okay, thanks for coming by, everybody. That's it.
It's not only that you don't need it, you don't want it. It actually causes harm. It's not good for you. It's it's so there's a lot to the whole fiber thing, but there was no real push for people to eat fiber before the 1980s when we said, hey, don't eat fat, don't eat meat. And then all of a sudden everyone started getting fiber. I was a kid during that. I remember this being discussed on the news and the people saying, people should maybe eat more fiber. It's recommended to eat more fiber and that will give something bulk to, work the peristalsis and things like that. It was just a suggestion to deal with a problem. Why were people constipated? Why were people constipated, in rising numbers to such an extent to become a problem out of nowhere? That this was never a problem before. Why wasn't anyone constipated before 1986? Well, the answer was everyone was eating fat. It's actually fat that drives your digestion. Your body can only absorb a certain amount of fat through bile, right? So when your body has bile, it's stored in your gallbladder, it's excreted out, and it'll concentrate, right? So it's actually where gallstones come from. If you don't eat enough fat, it'll concentrate. What happens to any hyper-concentrated solution at rest? It turns into precipitate, turns into stones, and that's what gallstones are. So if you and you'll see this, that everybody who gets gallstones, they're all like, I've been going on this weight loss diet. And how do you lose weight? You don't eat fat. If you want to lose fat, you stop eating fat. And even people in the carnivore community, they're like, oh, well, I want to lose fat, so I should stop eating fat, right? It's like, oh my God, no, stop it. Like this is not what we've been lied to about. Fat's really good for you, and your body is making bile in order to absorb fat. It wants that fat. When you run out of bile when you're eating fat, it's very difficult for your body to absorb fat. You absorb very little fat after that. You can absorb some, but very little. The rest of that goes out in your stools, and that's actually what keeps it soft. And because fat repels water, that can stay in your colon until Christmas. It's never going to get drier than it already is, and so that will always stay soft. And so you don't need fiber for that extent. Now, you actually don't want fiber either. So now people say, well, I don't mind it. I don't mind having salads. Well, actually, you don't want it because it can actually cause harm. The first argument that I heard when I was a kid was why we should eat fiber was, well, this was a good weight loss thing.
I remember hearing that, yes.
Yeah. Well, because it's bulky and it has no nutrients in it. So that was actually the argument for plants at first, was it has no nutrition. You get nothing out of it. But it feels like you're eating something, and it has bulk, and so that's going to hit the stretch receptors in your stomach. It's going to release a hormone called leptin, which will tell your brain, hey, look at that. We have food. Isn't that great? You don't need to eat as much. And this was thought to theorized that this would help you lose weight. And you can just, there's the celery diet. You may remember this. You can eat as much celery as you want. It takes more calories for your body to process the celery than you'll actually get from the celery. So you can just eat as much celery as you want. You just keep eating celery. You'll just lose weight. Well, that didn't happen, because they have a whole sorts of like nonsense in celery that's not good for you. You're not getting the nutrients and nutrition that you want. So you're just starving all the time. And your body is not dumb. You are not going to fool millions of years of evolution. You are just not that smart. And if you were smart, you would realize, hey, why don't I just eat what my body's designed to eat and let it do its thing? So, if you're arguing that we should eat fiber because it's bulky and it doesn't give us nutrition and we can't get anything out of it, like, why don't you just eat a plastic bag? Like this is the same thing.
Yeah, right.
Right? And it's just like, we shouldn't eat fiber for the same reason we shouldn't eat a plastic bag. We can't break it down. We can't get any nutrition from it, and it causes harm. Fiber actually causes microabrasions in your gut lining, increases mucus secretion and inflammatory response, and can actually precipitate autoimmune issues as well, which is a dysregulation of your inflammatory system, right? So, you ask someone with Crohn's and ulcerative colitis how they do with fiber. They say, oh, this is so good for your gut, so good for your gut. Then why does it absolutely cripple anybody with IBD or IBS, right? When in surgery, when someone has a problem with diverticulitis or appendicitis or maybe some other sort of surgery, and they're trying to let the bowel recover, what do? They put you on a low residue diet, i.e. low fiber diet, so that you don't have a lot going through your colon. You want to eat things that your body absorbs in the small intestine, so you're not really getting any residue into the large intestine. Well, by definition, that's anything except fiber, right? Because you cannot break down fiber at all. And this is the silly thing that they try to pitch as well, is that you can't break down meat. It just sits in your gut for 10 years. I remember hearing that as a kid. I was like, am I missing something? The gut is a tube. It only goes one way. Right? Like, there's no like out pouches and things like that where it just like sits there. This is just the meat section. It's just going to sit there and rot. It just goes out, Yeah. I mean, like, even as a kid, I could see how that didn't make any sense, because if you couldn't break it down, you would just excrete it. And that's what fiber is. That's why we told people eat fiber, because you can't break it down ever. All right. So why are we saying that we can't break down meat? First of all, you can break down and absorb 98% of the meat you eat, as long as you're not eating it with fiber and all the protease inhibitors and phytates and anti-nutrients that come with plants. And whatever you don't absorb gets excreted. And so it's all backwards and mixed up. But if you just start pulling at these threads, it all comes unraveled. The fiber causes huge bulk in your colon. And that is actually what's causing constipation. And that's actually what's causing blockages. Because you literally, this is fiber, this is plant fiber, this is like a 2x4 getting stuck in your colon, right? And so there was a study with over 2,000 colonoscopies where they were checking for diverticulosis, which is like just basically damage and outpouching of your distal colon. And then that can get infected. That's diverticulitis. You can get that surgically resected. It's a big deal. People die from this. And people say like, oh, well, you need more fiber. You need more fiber. This is because you haven't been eating fiber. Well, that is an assumption and an assertion that was not based on any study, that was not based on any science, but that is what people took to the bank. That was what was the official recommendation. And again, official recommendations may not be right. They may be fraudulent, but in this case, they may not be based in anything. It was a guess. And then the studies were actually done with over 2,000 participants, and they found that the only things that were even correlated with an increased risk in diverticulosis was more fiber and more bowel motions a day, right? And what do you have to do on a high fiber diet? Because you can't break it down, you cannot absorb it, you just keep defecating.
That's right, emptying.
Again and again and again. Whereas if you're just eating meat, you're going to absorb 98% of the meat that you eat. And so you're going to have very, very little waste. And people say, oh, well, that's not good. You need to be pooping all the time. Like, why? What does that have to do with anything? In fact, it's not good for you. In fact, it actually causes colon disease and damage to your colon. So it's actually bad for you.
Well, I think we've solved all the problems of the world. And through that, let me just say that Plant Free MD is your podcast. I'll send people in the show notes. I'm putting all the things we talked about. Chris Palmer's new book, of course, Dr. Lustig. There's just a lot that we talked about. Do you have a book? Have you written a book?
I'm in the process of writing one, but this year's been quite busy. At the hospital and things like that. So I haven't.
I guess being a neurosurgeon has taken up some of your spare time. So.
Yeah. Well, it's because I'm still in residency. I'm still training for neurosurgery. It's even more busy. Like if I was done and I was just I could just sort of pull back my hours a bit. But at the moment it's a bit more. But also because I've taken on the podcast this year, and I've also been doing the functional medicine work as well on the weekends. Good. So if I'm not working at the hospital on the weekends, I am working at the clinic, and then in any sort of spare hour, I'm doing these and trying to get things going there. So which is what I want to do, and I really find it very enjoyable and fulfilling, but it is very busy as well.
Okay, well when you circle back, as they say, when the book is published, and we can talk again. But great conversation today. Thank you so much, and tell all the people in Australia to eat more meat.
Yeah, I'm doing my best. Yeah, they're very, very up on the vegan side of things. When I got here, and I was, people found out I was only eating meat, they were just shocked and angered, most of them.
I know.
But it's actually moving. There's a lot of people that have moved to this sort of way of eating and understanding that this is something they've just been lied to, and so it's growing more and more popular, which is great.
Thanks for listening to the Lisa Fisher Said podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe and download all the episodes and leave a review, won't you? The Lisa Fisher Said podcast is produced by ClantonCreative.com.